Um, Welcome everybody. Um, I am going to give a quick intro to Jake, and then we'll get this thing rolling. So welcome, Jake. We're really excited to have you at UX Y'all. A little bit about Jake. He's an experienced designer and currently a product design manager at DocuSign. And his design career has spanned from designing digital experiences to theme park attractions, which sounds super rad. And I bet you have some really cool stories from that. I don't even know where you'd begin with designing one of those. And today he'll share an insightful perspective on job interviews and how to improve our chances of success in his talk, Hacking the UX Job Interview. Welcome, Jake. I'm going to turn off my camera and mic, and I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone's doing well and is safe and healthy. So like Joe said, my name is Jake Mitchell. I live up in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm a product design manager at DocuSign. And like Joe also mentioned before that, I worked in consulting and also advertising and some theme parks as well. But largely the story is not about where I've worked in the past. It's actually where I haven't worked. This is largely a story about how I've failed. While I've had a few successful interviews, for every successful interview, I've actually had many, many ones that were not good. Or as comedians like to say, I bombed. And I don't know if anyone else has had bad interviews like that before. Feel free to drop them in the chat if you want to share. Um, but for me, there was one year that was particularly rough in about 2015. Uh, my story was I was just a few years out of grad school, and I was really mainly trying to switch jobs for to another part of the country, to Richmond, for personal reasons. And I was applying for jobs, doing interviews over the phone, getting invited to do the on-site interview, fly to the company, spend all day doing the interview, and then I'd get that email, finding out I didn't get it. Womp womp. And this happened not just once; it happened several times. Uh, and if you've been through something similar, you probably know how draining that process can be. So all the time while this is happening, I'm trying everything I know to try to figure out what I'm doing wrong. And eventually, I have this kind of like revelation, and it's sort of like one of those shower moments when you just have clarity about something. And what it did is it reminded me of another time in my life. And so what I realized was how what I was going through with all these interviews was really just like this book I read back in high school about the SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test that high schoolers take to get into college. No, I was not a bad student per se, but I was not a great one either. And my SATs reflected that. I was probably right right at the very top of the bell curve. And there's really one book I got that really helped me improve my score, called The Underground Guide to the SATs. And this is just a book I found at the Barnes and Noble by my house, and it was pretty thin, especially compared to like Princeton Review and all the other ones that are like the size of a phone book. Uh, but for even for just being a smallish book, it was just incredibly helpful, and it really gave like a dramatic boost to my score, percentage wise. So what did it do? Like, what was the secret, right? The central message of the book was that really 90% of people that take the SATs or really any other test in life have no strategy when they go in. They open up the test packet, they start on question one, they try to pick the right answer, and then they go to the next question and they start the process all over again. And they do this until they've answered all questions or they run out of time. And that's was exactly what I was doing as well. But there is a smarter way to really take the SATs. You can sort of hack the SATs. If you realize that while the SATs might be asking you a question about something, what they're trying to do is to test your knowledge of the underlying subjects and concepts. And the SATs are tricky. Like most of the test is multiple choice, and so often you'll have two answers that are usually pretty obviously wrong, and then two that are very close to each other. Like, decimal point is in one place, or like in this question here, I don't know if you can see it. This is one that people frequently get wrong. It's like an order of operations challenge. It's very C and D are very similar, but it's trying to trick you, trying to have that underlying knowledge on there. And so really the point of the book is to think about and recognize these sorts of traps and focus on eliminating your error rate or reducing your error rate, not trying to necessarily always try to find the right answer and worry so much about that, and see how you can increase your odds by decreasing the amount of errors you're making. Um, so, really, in order to succeed, we have to understand what the question that's being asked is actually trying to test us on, and then think about what are the wrong answers and try to eliminate those. And when I started to apply this sort of mindset on the interview process and really thinking more about if the interview is more as a test that has these sorts of hidden traps in them, you know, things really started to improve for me. I finally started getting to that final round and actually passing, getting job offers. And after that point, my confidence, my success rate really improved. And so now I'm going to fast forward a little bit to today, and now I've gone a little bit further in my career, I've progressed, and now I'm starting to find myself being on the other side of the interview, and now I'm the interviewer. And very often I see candidates and people I'm talking to doing the exact same things I was doing, uh, which I guess is some form of the circle of life. Uh, so my hope for this talk is that I can save you some of the hard lessons I learned along the way on how to improve your odds when it comes to interviewing. And this is both whether you're a designer or a researcher or an ops. It can be applied. So what we're going to do is we're going to really treat the interview just like a big standardized test. Most interviews in product design and UX research have these sort of three big sections to them. They're sort of standardized off of these from what I've been able to see. And just like the SAT has reading and writing and math, for us we'll focus on these sections, on portfolio presentation, on one-on-one interviews, and the design challenge. And then for each one of these, we're going to uncover what are the actual things they're testing you on and develop a strategy on how we'll get around it as well. All right. So, and also, thank you, Melissa and Jacob, for sharing your stories as well. Yeah, so terminology tripping you up, right, right, and then getting to the final round for an internship. Yeah, internships are especially hard as well. All right, good to know. So let's talk next about the portfolio presentation. This is sort of the first part here. Um, so with portfolio presentations, you know, usually when candidates come for an interview, there's some sort of expectation that they'll give a presentation to the larger team. Generally, the audience is the recruiter, the hiring manager, some folks from the interview panel. Sometimes you'll see other designers and product team members there as well. And it also depends on where you're interviewing, but it can often go from around 45 minutes to an hour. So you generally have a wide amount of time. And this is where we start to get tripped up a little bit. So with the name of this often being the portfolio presentation or portfolio review, most applicants assume that what they're really being tested on is the work in their portfolio, right? We think we're being largely tested on the contents of our portfolio and what our capability and skills are in there. Uh, but actually, that's not entirely true. So while the portfolio presentation is a way to really like showcase your capability and your skills to a larger team, often what the team is grading you on is this whole totally different set of skills. What we have to remember is that they're really trying to understand is how well you can really describe yourself, your work, your decision making skills that lead to the work, and ultimately they want to know what kind of impact, what kind of outcomes have you been able to drive in your past work as well. I think that one is also really important. And often what I see is that, and I was guilty of this too, is that candidates can spend their time spend too much of their time sort of trying to prove themselves, trying to show off like their technical ability or the types of projects they've been on. And so what it leads to is that they uh, are being way too complex, having to try to over explain the work that they're in, or they go really far in the other direction and they pontificate and sort of, give like broad generalizations about their like design philosophy. It can be kind of a little bit too vague. What it leads to is the audience gets lost and they're not really sure uh, who exactly you are and what your skills are as well. And so fundamentally, what we have to do is what we have to remember is that if you've made it this far to the final round, uh, you have to remember that they really largely already know that you have the capabilities and the skills to do the job. At this point, the hiring manager has probably already talked to you and reviewed your portfolio, and they've gotten a sense of what your skill set is. And it's largely been determined that you have the qualifications to do the job. No hiring manager is going to say, well, I'm not really sure, but if they have like the functional expertise, I'm not sure if they can design, I'm not sure if they can research, but let me just put them through this process. Let me fly them out, and we'll sort of see what happens. Uh, Now, what they're really trying to do is assess and get this feel of less about if your skills as like a hard skills as a practitioner, and really more of your soft skills, really more of like your maturity in this field. And I found too that like this point gets more important the higher you climb the ladder, where your job and the success of your job becomes more around how well you can be influential and communicate and help build relationships and get work done as well. Okay, so uh, now that we understand what the true criteria is for the portfolio presentation, let's come up with a new strategy. So one way that can really be helpful in reframing this presentation is to think less of it as a portfolio review and think of it more as like a sales pitch. And in this case, the product you're really trying to sell is you, right? This company, they have some kind of need, they have an opening, and you're the solution to it. And in this way, we can make sure that our presentations are very clear on who we are, what we're strong at, what our strengths are, and examples of how we've succeeded in the past. So how do we do that? So uh, what I recommend is just first be very clear on who you are and what your strengths are. I think I really appreciate how our industry has such a wide net of skills and talents and backgrounds. So many of us have come from this is our second or our third career, and everyone that is a designer or a researcher or is in this industry is so highly individualized. Some of us have backgrounds in visual, graphic design. Some of us are more interaction design focused. I've worked with researchers who are really just amazing at doing, qualitative, deep facilitated inquiry and research, and other researchers that are just super data wizards uh, that can really like find insight out of an Excel sheet as well and really see through the data. And what's important is in our portfolios, our audience shouldn't have to really guess or have to think very hard to figure out what our strengths are. You can really save them all that mental processing power if you just tell them up front what your strengths are as well. So I'll give you an example of how this has worked in the past. Uh, so this is the title slide of a designer I mentored with about 2 years ago, and she was applying for a job for a design job, and she was preparing for a presentation. And before we met, her presentation was largely about the work she had done, and she really dived straight into her process and what she did. And I thought overall it was good, but I also thought it was really missing her story and who she was. And so we went through and we talked about what she saw as her strengths and how she wanted to be seen. And one thing that I thought really set her apart was that while she had a very nice and very like sunny personality, she was also funny enough like a real badass rock climber. And every time we would meet and get coffee, she would tell me about this climb she just went on or was getting ready to go on, and how she was climbing hundreds of feet in the air and was going on these routes that are very like technically difficult that most people can't get on, but she was able to do it. And so we talked about those adventures, and I asked her like, why, what is it about rock climbing that you like to do, and like what makes you excited to do to do that kind of thing, and not terrified. And she told me to her it's really all about the challenge and taking on a problem, powering through it, failing, but in the end, like ultimately succeeding. And I thought that there's something very uh, uh, earnest and authentic, and also just a cool story to know about this person as well. And it made me think like, this is so great. This is the type of person that I would want to work with. This is the side of her that I want to come through in the presentation as well. And so we reframed the presentation where we made sure that within the first couple of minutes, everyone in the audience knew that, that part of her, and that would be the lens that they viewed her in as, this real like tough, resilient, smart rock climber. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do when we tell people what our strengths are, what and who we are, what our personal connection is. It's important that we continue to do that as we do these types of interviews virtually. And ultimately, there's a quote I like to go back to uh, from Maya Angelou. He says, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Uh, I think that it's so true in terms of what we're trying to do in these first couple of minutes when we have this portfolio review, is really try to get that feeling across as well, and uh, not just be a solution, right, to a problem that they have, but also come across as a person. Uh, so that's how we want to make sure that we talk about who we are and show our strengths. Let's talk now about talking about your work. So after we've established and we've really framed up who we are and we've connected with our audience, we need to now dive into the work and really show that we can structure the work and also really explain the why behind the work, and also show that the work ties to direct outcomes as well. It actually had an impact on it. And there's one technique I found that really helps structure this, and it's borrowed from the world of consulting, and it's called the pyramid principle. I think that this is largely credited to Barbara Minto, who was a consultant at McKinsey, and she wrote this book like back in the 80s around this, around like business communication. And so, in order to use this principle, we need to think about how we normally structure our portfolio presentations, or any kind of like case study. Uh, so first, what we often do is we talk about the analysis that we did. We talk about like what the product space is, the particular problem we're trying to solve, this kind of research that we did, and then how we solve the problem. We kind of go up from upward, and we talk about the solution and how it works and what it looks like. And then at the very top of that pyramid, at the very end, we talk about the results it generated after it was launched. Maybe that's like one slide at the end. So most of our time is spent at the bottom of this pyramid, and then we spend a little bit more time in that middle area, and then at the very top is usually the least amount of time on the results. And so in business, this is what's known as being bottoms up in communication. And so the pyramid principle says that to our audience, to them, the most valuable part is not at the bottom of the pyramid, it's at the top of the pyramid. Those results are the effects from what you did. And that's what the audience needs to know about to really feel confident that you are the right person for the job. So when we talk about work, really we should be starting from the top of the pyramid, and then we work our way down as well. And I know this can be somewhat counterintuitive, or at least it's kind of felt counterintuitive when I first heard about it. And I think that's largely because usually when we tell a story, we tell it in a linear fashion. We tell it as we experienced it. We recollect a story from the beginning, and we usually think in cause and effect relationships. But what that can lead to is like a very monotonous story, it doesn't have tension or rhythm, and it can create a lot of like first like I did X and then I did Y and then I did this and then and so on and so on. And so what we could do instead is we can talk about the results first. And then so that creates structure and enables them to be able to see that the work that you're doing ties back to an outcome at the end as well. So we'll do a quick demo just to kind of show like what this can look like in practice. So let's just imagine like we have a case study, and let's say we talk with we say our team learned of this problem. We did research. We did all this analysis to understand the problem. We talked to people. We did like a strategy workshop. Here's a bunch of pictures of sticky notes up on the wall, and then we came up with a potential solution to solve the problem. And then so what we did next is we then did some wireframing of the solution, and then we slowly evolved that into mid fidelity, and then to like a higher fidelity prototype, and did some more research. And then after that, we decided to build it. And after we built it, we launched it, we found out that we uh, drove up our metrics, we achieved our goal, and we made some money for the company. And it's like, okay, great, that's a good story. Let's try it now in reverse. And so now we can instead start it with saying, so for this next project, we were able to achieve a major lift in our primary metrics, and we drove money. We drove X amount of dollars of revenue for the company. And the way we did that is by launching this right here. And this is largely a solution to a problem that we heard from customers who told us that it was difficult to do, X, Y, Z. And we discovered that by doing this research, by doing this workshop, by doing all of this as well. And so you really are creating, uh, yes, Trisha, it's exactly like journalism where you're putting sort of you have like a headline, and then you're having all of the details that are coming from that as well. And it's important to think about giving your audience that headline first, because then they can be able to understand it as well. So ultimately, we want to think about like what our audience wants is because it prioritizes, we're prioritizing the needs of our audience. They want to know about the kind of impact we're able to create in our jobs, and not just how well we're adhering to a process. And uh, the pyramid principle helps in that way because it helps us really focus on the comprehension of what we're talking about instead of trying to be just overly comprehensive as well. So so with setting up our who we are and then talking about our projects in more of a pyramid principle structure, it really helps us enable to understand that. So let's go on to now the second part, onto one-on-one interviews. So one-on-one interviews, probably my least favorite out of the three, and every place seems to have their own name for these. You might hear them described as behavioral interviews or situational task. What is it? Uh, what is it? Situation, task, action, and result interviews, or STAR interviews. And either way, the format's usually the same. You have about 30 minutes with one person, and they ask you a series of questions. And a lot of times, these are interview questions that are in a format about things you've done in the past and how you handled them. So it'll be like, tell me about a time when, or can you give me an example when you had a conflict with another team member and how you handled it? And so naturally, we often think that what we're being tested on is our past experiences and how successful we were in those challenging situations. Like, were we able to overcome this? Were we able to sort of prove that we could rise to the occasion? And there is an element of truth to that, but I think I think we can be even more precise in saying that what the interviews are really looking at more is just uh, they're looking. I'd say it's not that they're looking to have like a slam dunk answer for each of these questions. Instead, what we really need to do is demonstrate that we have the emotional intelligence, we have the sensitivity, we have this awareness around our ability to reflect and learn and ultimately improve ourselves. And basically, what we need to do is we need to show that we can self-manage, and uh, and these are stories are a good vehicle for being able to do that. So really, to prepare for these questions, you won't be able to guess, or you won't be able to know all the questions in advance, but you can really anticipate them by thinking now of like, what are your own challenge stories that you'd want to talk about, that you'd want to try to actually make sure to come across as well. So think back to examples in the past where you had these really challenging situations at work, and you can probably think of some where you succeeded, and there's also probably some where you did not. And it's okay if you did not. Most candidates would say you should never bring these up, but these might be the best answers you could possibly give, because those are usually the ones that lead to change, right? Those are usually the ones that make us say, I'm going to do this different next time. And the more you can talk about what you do different next time, the more that can help you as well. So ultimately, we want to have some of these stories in our back pocket, and ultimately just be prepared to talk about them. I think that the real challenge, I think, with a lot of these questions too, is that it's less about how you creatively solve problems. Like we're all in a creative field, and we're all creative thinkers, and this is ultimately asking you to like recall things that have happened to you in the past, and those are sort of two different parts of your brain. It can be really challenging to have to try to flip between those modes. At least that's how I feel about it. But the more you can sort of have these stories, loaded up and ready to go, that gives you more time to really reflect, talk about it, and share it as well. So what I like to say is really just rehearse, rehearse, feel good about the stories. This is this is silly, but I like to imagine myself as the main character in Reservoir Dogs. Uh, I won't give like a plot synopsis, but undercover cop, and he knows that he needs to earn the trust of these criminals, and so part of his cover story, he uh, he he tells them the story about how he evaded the cops one time, and he keeps practicing it over and over and over again, and each time he's adding detail to it, and until it feels real to him and natural. He's able to just to very easily start talking about the story. Uh, I'm not saying make up your stories, by no means, but practice your stories until you're comfortable talking about them as well. And so that's one-on-one interviews. Okay, so now let's go to a design challenge. All right, so the design challenge. So if you've had to take a design challenge in the past, feel free to drop it in the chat. Uh, I find that this is probably the one with the most variation to it. But I've seen some common examples of some design challenges, like design a pool for a resort, design a scheduling app for dentists and doctors. It's one that I actually got one time. Design a new parking system, like parking ticketing system. Design an elevator control panel. So these are all, very speculative. You're often given about 20 to 30 minutes to work through the challenge, and then you might get 5 or 10 minutes at the end to present your solution. And I've also seen that sometimes you might have just one person with you, like it's one-on-one activity between the candidate and the facilitator. And other times you might have a whole team with you, or you might have people come in and role play as like a stakeholder or a customer as well, and playing different roles. So some places get like really involved with it. uh, and I also know too, like design challenges are getting a fair amount of criticism as well. I've been seeing too, uh, like in the past, some places will ask you to uh, take something home and work on it, or even like design a part of their product. And I think those rightly are starting to go away. But I am starting still see some form of some kind of collaboration hour-long challenge as well. And I think it's a good idea to at least anticipate and be prepared for in case you get asked to do a design challenge. And it's really just more of having a good mindset and being aware of what the interview is going to test you on. So uh, so similar to the portfolio presentation, um, we often tend to focus our attention in these kinds of exercises on trying to solve the problem, right? We make this assumption that this is somehow a test of how creative we can be, or like our innovation skills, or how good our problem skills are. I've also been in these before, and I've seen some candidates treat them more as like a brain teaser or riddle, as if like there's some kind of like secret gotcha in there that they have to figure it out, and then they spend half their time asking a bunch of questions, and not they don't make a ton of progress in the end. So when we think about what we're really being tested on, it's really a lot more about uh, our collaboration skills, process maturity, and also just our ability to get up in front of the whiteboard and just start getting to work as well. With these kinds of challenges, like there really is no right answer at the end of them. There is no like answer key that says like if they came up with this, that means that they got it or not. It's a lot more uh, around like the process to getting there. And I've also never heard about anyone trying to sneak in any kind of like gotchas or trick questions in here as well. So with these, just largely remember they're testing you on your ability to collaborate, communicate, take charge, lead, and then also your approach to how you solve the problem. If you're structured in it, if you're able to think through the challenge as well. So you can tell I'm a real millennial because I got another movie reference for y'all. If anybody knows what this is from, feel free to drop it in the chat. Uh, if you're a fan of Star Trek, you might connect this to the test. Oh, nice, fellow nerds. You might connect this to the test that Starfleet commanders in training are given. It's called the Kobayashi Maru, and the point of it is that it's a no-win situation. It doesn't matter what the Starfleet commander does; they're going to get blown up at the end. It's more about testing the abilities of the commander and like in great pressure as well. And I think it can help to sort of have the same lens on it as well, in that these kinds of tests, we need to decide what we're going to focus on, and then really show that we have like a clear framework on how we're going to prioritize one solution over another. So with these kinds of tests, usually the best thing we can do is just have some semblance of a game plan going into it. You know, we don't know like the actual prompt, but at least we can have like an approach for it. And for me, that means that this is basically my game plan. I'm going to define the job to be done, try to define the business outcome, get alignment on that, start to journey map the customer experience or the end user experience, highlight a couple of the pain points or like moments of truth or biggest impacts, decide on potential opportunities, come up with a few solutions, and then do a presentation at the end. And that's not to say that this is how you should do it. This is just how when I've done these in the past, I've externalized my approach to them, and by being able to say this is what I'm going to do, it really helps you systematically work through the challenge as well, which I think facilitators and interviewers like to see as well. That you're confident, you know what you're doing, and you're working through the challenge as well. So after you've gone through and you've done the challenge, you come up with your solution, you've gone to the end. What you want to do is do some kind of playback, right? And just like in our portfolio review, we really want to use the pyramid principle, and we want to start from the end. So if your final recommendation is something like you want to conduct several experiments, you might say something like, I have a hypothesis that we can achieve this business outcome if we reimagine the payment portal. And here are 3 reasons why I think that's true. And then to explain the reasons, and you just work your way down down the pyramid as you explain it as well. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, as we start to wrap up here, we just have to remember that really for each of these sections, what's happening is we're being tested in subtle ways, and really half the challenge to succeeding in these is just being aware of what's really being asked of us. I think one of the biggest takeaways I have is to remember that when you get this far, it has been largely determined that you are capable for the job. I just wish more candidates had more of like that confidence and knowing that like they have the skills for it. You know, the previous interviews have largely determined you have the hard skills. This is a lot more about assessing your soft skills and all the things you need to be able to do in your job when it comes through navigating challenge and complexity and ambiguity as well. So if you can remember that, you know, what you're ultimately being tested on, you know, you can have the confidence to know that you already have everything you need in the interview to succeed. You just really have to be fully present for it. And cliched as it is, I think just being yourself and being authentic really shines through. All right, so I think we have a couple more minutes. I'm just going to give bonus section. Are we good on time?
Yeah. We're doing great.
Okay, cool. All right, I just have one last section. Um, just one more hot take. And well, I'm still in my soapbox here on how can employers improve the interview process as well. And there's just one last thing I wanted to address. So if you are a hiring manager, or if you also have influence on the hiring process as well, um, I hope that you're thinking about how this current system that we have right now could be improved. I think like standardized testing, we've created sort of a standardized interview process because it's easier for the hiring manager and for the team to be able to put employers through it. And so if there's one sort of encouragement I'd have, it would be to really reimagine this and flip the interview and see it more as an opportunity to pitch the job as an opportunity to the candidate for them to take as well. And I know it's often been said that when you interview for a job, you know, you're also interviewing them for the job as well. But you know, the candidate I think still does, you know, the majority of the labor involved. They are the ones that have to fly to the interview site, right? They're the ones that have to call in sick and or pretend to call in sick, right? And go through all this work as well. And I think if we really want to change things, we have to change this dynamic as well. And I think what that means is uh, hiring managers need to be more confident before they put somebody in at that very end of that final process. That should be more as an opportunity to really give the candidate a taste of the job, what the team is like, what the culture is like, you know, really like showcase why they'd want to join instead of the other way around as well. So that's my soapbox around it. I will say it does require a lot of work, but I think it's still important if we want to mature our field even more and be more inclusive. So that's it. Dig deep with candidates early in the process, and thank you.
Awesome, Jake. That was fantastic. That was that like as someone who's been through lots of interviews myself, earlier in my career, it was that's super valuable stuff. I wish I had known that. I wish I had known that earlier. And it's still helpful
Thank
now,
you.
right? Even the further you get along, it doesn't change. So that's awesome. And we have some really good questions from the audience related to a couple of the things that you said. One of them that got a number of likes, and this is something that that I struggled with, especially earlier in my career when I was trying to get my first job. Was what if you're unable to show metrics or the impact of your work, like projects where you hand off that work and then maybe you don't know the end result because of the way the organization's set up or the way your internship kind of got cut short. Do you have any recommendations for the audience there?
Such a good question. I've worked at agencies in the past, and that's such a challenge where you just release something and you let it go, and you say, "I hope that did well." You know, a couple things I've thought about before of like try to see if there's any signal of success. Like I've been on projects where I remember in one portfolio piece I had where literally the client said, "I want I want the customer to be of this app to be able to pull it out and show it at parties." Was like their very helpful design direction on it. And at the end, they told me they're like, "Yeah, this is exactly what I was looking for." And I was like, "Well, in my book, that means it was a success." I think other ways to think about it too is if you're not able to get like external metrics on it, at least show what your internal metrics of success are for it
Mhm.
as well. Like if you say, "Hey, I did this, you know, I worked through this thing, and for me, success meant that I could show it to 5 people and they'd be able to succeed in the task as well. And
Mhm.
that's how I knew, it's a leading indicator of success, but at least it shows that you're thinking about what the ultimate outcome is instead of just making a deliverable.
Mhm. Very interesting. Yeah, like doing your own like internal benchmarks almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great idea. We serve ones about like kind of like the questions are like what are common mistakes, or is there a most common mistake you see in interviews? And you kind of hit on that in a couple of places, but is there, do you want to elaborate on that at all? Is there anything that you, any kind of like big thing that we should all watch out for when we're interviewing?
I mean, I think one thing that I always see, and it kills me on the inside, is just the fundamentals are always something that will always bite us. Where like things like uh, your materials, just making sure that like every detail you've been able to address, like typos. There's nothing worse than going through a portfolio and giving a presentation and then being like, oh no, I spelled something wrong, or that's kind of aligned weirdly. It happens, uh, but the more that you can show it, show it to your peers, get feedback on it, ask them to like help you, nitpick through the entire thing, and
Mhm.
really just like those fundamentals. Uh, that that professional detail orientation is just so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, putting the same care into that as you would like your actual product that you're building. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. We do have a couple that are kind of related to the last slide that you, or the last section you had pulled up, which was awesome to see. Kind of like combating bias and like thinking about the person that's doing the interview. And I'll kind of give this to you in two parts because they're a little bit related, which is how do you combat ageism when trying to get hired? And as a hiring manager, what are you doing to remove bias from your hiring process? And you kind of hit on that in that last section. This was asked, I think, a little bit before you went through that. But if there's more you'd like to say about it, we'd love to hear it.
I mean, both really good and important questions. I'm very thankful that DocuSign has introduced and required everybody that is part of the interview process goes through unconscious bias training through like multiple bias trainings, and
Mhm.
those have been really helpful. Just because I think the key there is unconscious and knowing that like you have to have strategies to combat that as well. I always think about like how the parallel like in the music industry, how when they went to blind auditions and like how that dramatically improved their diversity, because everyone can say that they don't have bias, but we all have an idea of what a
Mhm.
symphony performer is, and we're going to be drawn towards that as well. So the more that we can try to strip out any hints of bias, the more inclusive we can be about it. Um, so yeah, it still goes back to not trying to encourage your employer and the hiring team around them to build systems that can help eliminate bias from them as well. One thing that we've done at DocuSign is we've built in it. We have what are called guilds, which are just kind of like committees, and
Mhm.
they're volunteer, made up of designers and researchers in our org that go after different initiatives. And we have one just around for hiring, just trying to think better on like checking our job descriptions to make sure that before we publish this and just saying, can I get feedback on this? Can you help me spot like anything that
Mhm.
you know could give me better recommendations on how to phrase these things, or getting feedback from interviewers as well. So
Mhm.
I think it's a something that the entire company can really rally behind. And I think we're all beginning to see us more want to contribute. It's just a matter of leading and organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Those are excellent points. And I think we have quite time for maybe one more question. So I'm gonna pick one. And this is I think a good one too that you might have some thoughts on. And it's, as a career switcher, what advice do you have for people who have more soft skills, who have the soft skills more than the hard skills? So maybe like really advanced soft skills, and they're
Mhm.
great in a behavioral, but don't necessarily have maybe they don't have like the metrics to back up hard skills yet, or they're building their portfolio and their experience.
Totally. I think great thing about soft skills is they always make good stories, right? They always come into play to show like how you can talk about like how you navigated through something or how you're able to negotiate through something as well. So even if you have something where maybe it's maybe on the surface it might not be able to like display as much hard skills as you'd like, you can still talk about it and really try to build a story around it as well. I'd say like if there's any way you can, craft a narrative to say, how if you want to showcase your soft skills, say like it was more about cross team alignment, like how our team was able to break down silos and come up with a new structure of building great work, and talking more about less about like the project, but more about the process that you helped evolve around that as well, which is super in demand. Like think about design ops and everything else we're trying to do to mature our field.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, one of the things that comes to mind to me is like there are lots of folks that are entering the industry that have career experience outside of design, and how valuable that is. And like career experience is career experience. And
Totally.
and so showing that off can be awesome as well. And can really prove that you're great at driving alignment, collaborating, all of those things that are really valuable. So
exactly.
Very cool. Well, this was super helpful, Jake. We really appreciate it and loved having you here to give your talk. And I think you had a slide up on do you have a Twitter handle potentially?
I do. It's Jake Mitchell, and also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Jake Mitchell UX. But yeah, always happy to chat as well.
Right on. All right. Well, super appreciated having you, Jake. And I guess we'll let everybody go and get ready for the keynote.
All right. Thanks, everyone.